Skeletons. Skeletons are everywhere. Today, we are going to be talking about the Ossiarch Bonereapers, and we're going to be talking about Soulblight Gravelords. So this is one that I've been putting off for a while because Soulblight Gravelords are pretty good, and there isn't really an amazing amount that I can say about them that I haven't already said. They seem to turn up at pretty much every tournament that we have out here. So yeah, I'm going to try and offer my input into the faction. We're going to be doing some list building with them. We are going to be taking a look at some of the interesting fighters, so that'll be pretty good. And yeah, I hope that it's going to be something that's going to be interesting for you, and we'll see how we go. But before we get in there, please, I'd like to remind you that if you do like what you're watching, you can show me some support over on Patreon, or if you wanted to join me over on YouTube, you can become a member, or if you wanted to check out Streamlabs, that might be something that you'd be interested in. You get to see behind the scenes stuff, you get to see what I'm working on next, and generally, yeah, you get access to me over on Patreon if you have any specific questions that you have. Okay, so we're going to start with Soulblight Gravelords. Arguably, they are the best faction in the game. Their chaff units, because they're all movement 3, they benefit massively from the tax that most warcry fighters pay on their movement. So in effect, they all get a pretty hefty points reduction just for that. They have a number of very good chaff options. They've got skeletons, they've got Graveguard, they've got zombies, which are also very good. They've got some very good Bladeborn options in terms of the Sons of Velmorn. What this means is that most builds are effectively viable because you can spend 500, 600 points worth of anything and still get in there a solid core of 5, maybe 6 skeletons or Graveguard. So yeah, that makes them very versatile and it makes them very strong, especially on objective games and treasure missions, where they can kind of gum up the board and use their very good support pieces to lock down the opponents. I mentioned that they're movement 3 already, but that's kind of really not the case. Most of their fighters are going to be looking at having additional movement abilities of their own, or if not, what you can do is you can ally in something maybe from Flesh Eater Courts to get more bonus movement. When you're writing your lists, they write like a movement 3 warband, so you get a lot of guys, but in effect, when you're playing, they're not a movement 3 warband. So, like I've said, they got a lot of really good fighters. Probably the highest impact one is we're going to look at the Graveguard with Great White Blade. It's 65 points. It is 10 wounds, which is real good. But look at that damage profile, 3524. It's a lot of damage for just 65 points. And those 10 wounds is just enough to keep it alive and to enable it to do the damage that you want it to do. All of their chaff fighters, they all have the minion remark, and they all get Shambling Horde as a double. So the fighter can use this ability if they're within 6 inches of a visible friendly fighter with the faction remark of Soulblight Gravelords and the hero remark, and this fighter gets a bonus move action up to a number of inches equal to the value of this ability. So your basic guys are going to be able to use bonus moves. We're going to see some of the stuff that we can ally in to give them extra movement. So it really allows you to capitalize on your very cheap core fighters and get them where they need to be to bring that very good 2-4 damage, mostly wounding on 3s to bear. Next up, I'd like to talk about the Vargoyle. The Vargoyle is 260 points, so it's one of your more expensive support pieces. It's got a 4-4-2-5 damage profile, which is pretty good. Movement 8, which is good. It has the fly remark, so it can get where it wants to go. And it's got 32 wounds. So it's very scary. It can fly about the place. And generally, it's one of your more efficient damaging fighters in the faction. All heroes, something I do want to mention, get the Summon Undead Minions ability. It's had a little bit of a nerf earlier on in the year, but effectively what it allows you to do is you're allowed to bring back fighters with the minion rune mark. It's a resurrect. They gave Graveguard the elite rune mark, and the difference is if you're bringing back a fighter without the elite rune mark, they come back with their full allotment of wounds, and if you want to bring back a fighter with the elite rune mark, they come back with the amount of wounds on the value of the dice. What this also means with the summoning changes is that your Graveguard and your skeletons that you do bring back are not going to be able to do anything on the turn that they are resurrected, so they can only really start to work from the next turn. Previous to this change, what you would see is warbands with not all that many Graveguard. You could take 3 or 4 And that would be more than enough because you could run them at your opponent and then resurrect them and then they can carry on fighting. Now you're seeing warbands with far more Graveguard because of their limited ability to come back to life. Or you're going to be seeing warbands go in the far opposite direction with a lot more skeletons because skeletons are resurrected with their full allotment of 8 wounds. And if they have shields and spears, for example, they're going to have that toughness 4. Moving on to the Vampire Lord. Again, pretty good damage profile, 4/4/2/6. That 6 crit damage is very nice. It's only 225 points. Movement 5, fly, which is nice, 25 wounds, which is good. Toughness 5, which is a step up from the Vargoyle. So really between the two, you kind of choose which kinds of hero that you want. Personally, I prefer the Vampire Lord over the Vargoyle. Yes, it's a little bit slower. Yes, it's got a lot less wounds, but it's much cheaper. Moving into lists, this is a tried and tested list. It is tournament winning. It did very well at Warhammer Fest that happened earlier on in the year. We are talking about a Vargoyle, which we've already said. We're going to be allying in an Abhorrent Arc Regent. The Arc Regent has the Bringer of Death triple, which, like I said, is a movement buff. You can add half the value of the ability to the movement characteristic of friendly fighters within 6 inches of the Arc Regent, which is real good. The Arc Regent itself is also no slouch in combat, 4/4/3/5. Very good, very solid damage profile. We got 3 Graveguard with great weapons. We got a Graveguard with a shield, 3 skeletons with spears, and 2 zombies, rounding out with the Direwolf as one of your thralls. It is deceptively fast. It's got a bunch of high movement fighters through the vampires, through the Vargoyle, and the Direwolf itself. And of course, it's got the movement boosting abilities themselves. So it can really get across the board and go to where it's going to go. And the Graveguard themselves, they provide all the damage you need from your chaff fighters, whilst your skeletons and your zombies can tie up objectives and tie up treasure. It's real good. I played against this list a bunch of times. It's only 12 fighters. I say only. It's very easy for Soulblight Gravelords to hit 15 fighters, but 12 I feel is it's enough. It's enough fighters to be able to do exactly what you want in terms of objectives, whilst keeping the damage up from your key fighters like your Vargoyle, like your vampires. So yeah, it's real good and it's really versatile. One of the questions that you might have is, okay, if Soulblight Gravelords are so good, if I just wanted to pick them up for casual games, how would I build? Because you can have a whole bunch of skeletons, you can have a whole bunch of Graveguard for not a lot of points, and it's still not a great experience for your opponent, especially if you're playing on objective or treasure missions. They have a bunch of less optimal fighters. You've got stuff from Cursed City, for example. You've got the Kosogi Night Guard. You've got things like the Vargskia that you might want to consider bringing. They are not as good as some of the better things, but you can kind of counter that by still having your core skeletons and your core Graveguard. So that might be something that you want to check out. You can use Divine Blessings, actually, to make Night Guard pretty decent. They're 2 attacks to begin with. They have a lot of wounds. They have 30 wounds for the amount of points you're paying. But if you give them an extra attack, suddenly they become pretty good, and they become pretty decent kind of anchors that still have the ability to counterattack if they're charged. Going into Ossiarch Bonereapers, again, they are one of the better warcry factions. It's mainly down to the ability of very cheap chaff with 10 wounds and with toughness 5. They get some very good damage from Necropolis Stalkers and from your Morgos Harbingers or your Archai. So if you've seen my video on Flesh Eater Courts, they're kind of a bit like that. They play with a lot of little guys with a bunch of big guys to do the damage and to do the supporting. They have a generally pretty poor hero lineup, but they do, from their heroes, get the longest ranged movement ability in the game. So even taking their cheapest guys, you still bring some utility to the battlefield. They get access to, of course, all the Death allies and all the Death Bladeborn, so you can plug those tactical gaps that you might have. Looking at some of the fighters of interest here, I've chosen a bunch of guys that I think represent the best or the most efficient options that you can take. Starting with Necropolis Stalkers with the Spirit Blades. There are a couple of different flavors of Stalkers. I think the Spirit Blades is better. 5 attack, strength 4, 2/5 damage profile, very good. Movement 5, real good in a faction of otherwise movement 3 fighters. It's only 200 points, it's got 28 wounds, so you can put out a lot of damage for those points that you're paying. And of course, if it wants to get into the fight a little bit easier, it does have a bonus move double if they're within 6 inches of an enemy fighter. So all round, I think they're solid. They'll do the damage that you want them to do. Mortek Guard themselves, this is really where the strength of Ossiarch Bonereapers is. They are 55 points, 10 wound, toughness 5 chaff. Real good. They got a couple of different flavors. You have the option to take spears. The spears have 1 less attack, but they have crit 5. So crit 5 is pretty good, but with that less attack, and considering that you really want to push into the strengths of your Mortek Guard, which is going to be those shields with the toughness 5, I would generally leave the spears at home. And they also have Great Blades, which is a 2/4/2/4 damage profile. It's okay, it's just not as good as the Grave Guard with their strength 5. If they had strength 5, then yeah, possibly that might be something you want to look at. If they had 3 attacks like the Grave Guard do, then that's also something you might want to look at. But yeah, overall, I think Nandrite Blades are a fine choice. And looking at the Ossiarch Bonereaper heroes, like I said, they're pretty poor. So generally, I'd be looking at just bringing a Mortek Hekatos. The Hekatos is 105 points. It is the leader of your Mortek Guard. And because it's cheap, it really allows you to focus on your other fighters. The Hekatos, along with the rest of your heroes, do get the Unstoppable Advanced triple, which is actually pretty good. So until the end of the battle round, you add half the value of this ability rounding up to the move characteristic of friendly fighters that are in the same battle group as this fighter. So if it's in your shield, it will give the bonus move to everyone else in your shield, regardless where they are on the battlefield. So they can be on the other side of the battlefield, they could be anywhere really, and Unstoppable Advance is going to give you that movement buff. It's the longest movement buff in the game. It can affect anyone from anywhere. You might want to consider putting your Hekatos into the same deployment group as maybe your Necropolis Stalkers to give them that extra move, because they'll be going off and they'll be fighting wherever they are, and they want to free up their attacks and their abilities to do more damage in combat. Or alternatively, you might want to put it in there with your Mortek Guard to get them to move around the battlefield. For the list here, I'd like to show off again my reaction control list. I talked about this before in a video that I did a long while ago around reaction control and what you could do with counter and how you could build for that. Just to look at the list itself, we're looking at Mortek Hekatos because he's cheap. King Morlach here, we're going to be allying in the Sons of Velmorn. You got Jedran, Helmar, Thane. I've put in a Dreadblade Harrow here. He's 235 points. The Dreadblade is really there to give that extra move and to give that resurrect on anyone who's died in your warband. He's also got the teleport triple, which allows him to go places and get treasure very easily, which is something that I feel that a generally slower warband like this could really benefit from. So yeah, I like the Dreadblade Harrow. I think it's a decent option in this list. And then on top of that, we got 4 Mortek Guard with Nandrite Blades. Damage doesn't matter on your Mortek Guard because you can counter with that toughness 5, so that's very good. King Morlach offers resurrection of his own fighters, and he gives a pretty good damage profile, actually, 4/4/2/5. Helmar and Thane, of course, they are Graveguard, so they get all of the benefits that Graveguard themselves do, and they have their own attack boosting double that they can use if their other one has attacked. That's called Sibling Rivalry. Now, I like Jedran, but some people don't like him. He's basically the most tanky skeleton alive. He's got like those 30 wounds, and he's got the toughness 5, and he's got decent damage, and he's got his ability to make it so that King Morlach can't be attacked. But I know that some people don't like him, so you have some options in there. You can drop Jedran, who's 150, and if you feel like you're not going to need the Dreadblade Harrow, you can drop that as well. That opens up 385 points to buy a bunch of replacements. Now, what would you want to take? I think due to the cheap chaff, Ossiarch Bonereapers are really spoiled for their heavy hitter options, depending on what you want. You could take a Varble for 285, that's very good. He's got his bonus attack triple, which gives him a very good move then attack ability. So you can move in there, use your triple, get +3 attacks, swing for 6 on a 5/3/5 damage profile, which is real good. You've got your Necropolis Stalkers again if you wanted something a little bit cheaper, though maybe not as maneuverable. Though Necropolis Stalkers do have their free move double if they're within 6 inches, so that's also very good. Alternatively, Morghast Harbingers are pretty good. The Harbinger, I feel, is a very good in-house alternative to the Vargulf. Again, 3/5/3/5 damage profile, movement 8, just like the Vargulf, toughness 4, just like the Vargulf, 35 wounds, just like the Vargulf. What the Harbinger has over the Vargulf is that it's got a bonus move action on a triple from Unbridled Ferocity. So it really depends on what you think you're going to be fighting and how you want to build. You can use the +1 attack Divine Blessing on either your Morghast or your Vargulf. Give them both 4 attacks, makes them much more efficient and consistent in combat. You're effectively increasing their damage potential by 1/3 for only 25 points. It does make them expensive, but you know, with those 35 wounds, they should be able to survive for long enough to bring that damage to bear. Okay, and that's it from me for today. Thank you very much for watching. I hope this was interesting to you, looking at both the Soulblight Gravelords and Ossiarch Bonereaper lists, doing a little bit of list building with them, and generally seeing what they can bring to the battlefield. As always, if you like what you see, please don't forget to like and subscribe, and let me know what you think about these two factions, if you have any interesting builds that you want to share, or if you've been having any particular success with them recently. A big thanks to members of my Patreon as always, and yeah, that's it from me. I've been Aitan, and I will see you next time.